Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy Beans and a Merry Christmas to you all. Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast. I'm your host, Luke, the Jolly One. Hope you're doing well this holiday season. Hope you're all good and that you're being good for Christmas and you're not on the naughty list and Santa comes to visit you this holiday season. Only one more, well, not one more sleep, but only one more week and then the Jolly Fat Man will arrive. But until then, I've got a couple episodes left for you. So today we're going to be looking at Gremlins from 1984. But before we get into that, I want to do a bit of housekeeping because I like to keep my house nice and clean during the festive season. So make sure that you follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. If you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And finally, if you listen to this on Spotify on your mobile phone, then don't forget to leave a 5-star rating. Today is a very special episode, not just because I'm looking into Gremlins, but because it's the People's Choice episode. I've never done one of these before, but it's something I've always wanted to do. Basically, the reason why it's so special and the reason it's the People's Choice is because I left it to you, wonderful people, the listeners, to decide what we're going to look at for the final, well, second to last week of Christmas. For a long time, I couldn't decide. I knew that for the first 2 weeks, I wanted to look at obscure Christmas movies. I wanted to look at movies that other people weren't talking about, weren't looking into. And I did. I looked at I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus and Unaccompanied Minors. But for sort of the third week, because I knew what I wanted to do for Christmas, which I'm not going to spoil it here, but it's a very, very good one. And it's been one on my list for a long time. But I couldn't decide what to do the third week. And I had loads of ideas and I managed to narrow it down to 3 choices, but I couldn't decide off what they were. Those 3 choices were, so it was Violent Night, Gremlins, Miracle on 34th Street, and Charlie Brown's Christmas. And I couldn't decide. Violent Night was an absolutely incredible out of the blue movie that I watched last year and it blew me away and it was fantastic and I really, really enjoyed it. Gremlins, again, it's one that I grew up with. There's loads of nostalgia there. I know it's a movie that everybody talks about, but it's still one of them films that I just really wanted to discuss. Miracle on 34th Street, this was the 90s one with David Attenborough's Richard Attenborough, who plays Santa Claus in that movie. Again, loads of nostalgia, loads of memories. And then finally, Charlie Brown's Christmas. I'm a big Charlie Brown fan. I reviewed the Charlie Brown Peanuts movie quite recently this year and had a lot of fun with that. And there was also a lot of buzz off you guys, the listeners. You guys really seemed to enjoy it. It blew up on YouTube. It blew up on Spotify. So I figured I want to look at another Charlie Brown thing. So like all these choices, I loved them all and I knew I could talk about them till the end of days, but I couldn't decide. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to leave it to the people. And did you people show up? 26 of you showed up and voted and it was incredible. And it was that tight of a vote for a lot of it that I couldn't just do one vote. I did a semi-final and a final. So this is the result of the first one, right? So in first place, that won was Gremlins with 46% of the vote. In second place was Violent Night with 31% of the vote. In third place, it was Charlie Brown's Christmas with 15%. And in last place, it was Miracle on 34th Street with 8%. Bit of a shame because I kind of wanted to do Miracle on 34th Street because I really like that film. But it lost that round. One thing I found interesting before I move on was that we had Dissect That Podcast commented, was like, they said, I love Gremlins, but Violent Night has become one of my favourite Christmas movies. David Harbour was born to play Santa. I completely agree. Stu, World Order, he commented with Violent Night as well. And reading their comments and doing this voting, I kind of got a little bit biased when I was like, I'll leave it to the people, but I really hope that Violent Night wins because the conversations I was having behind the scenes as well I was like, I want to talk about Violent Night because it is an underrated gem of movie, and it's very up my alley of movies that people just don't talk about. But I thought I'd leave it to the people, so we'll see what happens with the next vote. So the next vote comes, that one ends, and I decide, you know what, we're going to do a semi-finals. So let me go to my bookmarks. So the semi-finals, this is what we got. So in first place again, so we had 10 votes this time, not as many as the last time, but it was the semi-finals, so it's not so bad. But who knows if those extra people have voted, maybe it would have swung differently. But here we are today. So in first place with 50% of the vote was Gremlins. In second place was Violent Night with 30%, and Charlie Brown's Christmas came in at 20%. So sadly, Charlie Brown lost that one. Then I thought, we're in the finals now. So in the finals, in the final round, it was Violent Night against Gremlins. This one had 22 votes. Again, Stu's World Order, he commented, goes, again, unpopular opinion, but I would say Violent Night. I was very much at this point agreeing with Stu, and I still am. I really, really like Violent Night, and it's on the list for next year. I'm definitely going to be talking about Violent Night next Christmas, so stick around for that one. But about 22 votes in the final round, Gremlins won with 68% of the vote, and Violent Night getting a 32%, which is still pretty close. I thought it'd be a bit more neck and neck, but yeah, Violent Night lost and Gremlins won. So here we are today. And I just want to say thank you to Dissect That podcast, Stu's World Order, and everybody else who voted. Thank you very much for the people that retweeted, commented, liked, shared it, and all that jazz. Like, it really means a lot to me. I want to thank everybody in the Doom Generation Discord for liking and sharing and interacting. It really means a lot. So thank you, all you guys there. And yeah, here we are today. We're talking about Gremlins. Maybe I'll do it again. Like, I had a lot of fun doing the polls and doing the voting. And when people commented and, was giving their opinions, I really love that as well. Because again, that's the whole point of podcasting. It's to get a dialogue. It's like, I could sit here all day and talk about what I love on the podcast. What makes it fun for me is the dialogue that comes after, is the people giving comments, the people that DM, the people that interact, people go, you know what, I agreed with you there, or I disagreed with you there. Like, this is the interesting part of podcasting to me, is just seeing the comments, seeing the dialogue, seeing what people actually think, or people agree with me or not, because again, people can have different opinions, and I just love to experience that. But yes, finally, we are getting into it. It's Gremlins from 1984. So this is the synopsis for Gremlins. Obviously, we know Gremlins, but we're going to pretend like we know nothing about Gremlins, and we're going to go in it with a clean slate. So the synopsis goes as follows. Miniature green monsters tear through the small town of Kingston Falls. Hijinks ensue as a mild-mannered bank teller releases his hideous loonies after gaining a new pet and violating 2 of the 3 simple rules. No water, violated. No food after midnight, violated. And no bright light, oddly, not violated. Hilarious mayhem and destruction in a town straight out of Norman Rockwell. So, when your washing machine blows up or your TV goes on the fritz, before you call the repairman, turn on all the lights and look under all the beds, because you never can tell. There might just be a gremlin in your house. Thank you very much, IMDb, there, for that fantastic plot summary. As for the cast, so we've got Zach Galligan as Billy. We've got Phoebe Cates as Kate. Oh, Phoebe Cates. Oh, she is forever queen. She is absolutely gorgeous. I know she's retired from acting, but yeah, she's always just a goddess, and can't say much more positive things about her. She's gorgeous. We've got Hoyt Axton as Randall Peltzer. Kyle Luke as the old man, as the grandfather who has Gizmo. We also have Corey Feldman as Pete. Dick Miller, I love his name. Sorry, I'm a young child at heart. I can't laugh every time I say his name. But Dick Miller as Mr. Futterman, and Polly Holiday as Miss Deagle, who is the horrible witch lady in this movie. So that is your cast. As for sort of my memories on this movie. So obviously everybody's seen Gremlins. Everybody knows the story. Everybody knows what the Gremlins is. It's a staple of basically everybody's childhood. And no matter what age you are, you have seen Gremlins, or you know of Gremlins, or you at least know the name of Gizmo. I remember growing up, Actually, say grown up quite recently. A couple of years ago, we had a Shih Tzu, and when she was a puppy, she looked just like Gizmo, so we named her Gizmo. She sadly passed away now, but she was my favourite dogs of all the animals I've got. I mean, we're a dog house in this family, and we've had tons of dogs, but she was my favourite. Don't tell the others, but Gizmo was my favourite. But she always looked like Gizmo, and it's kind of funny because when she was a puppy, she looked just like a Mogwai. Then she grew up, and she looked like the Luft Dragon. She was white, but she had the big sort of like Luft Dragon sort of face, especially when she lay down. She would never lay down like long ways like a sausage. She would always be like curved, so she would look like the Luft Dragon. But again, by that stage, it was too late to call her Luff or just or Dragon or something like that. So she looked like the Luft Dragon as old. But when she was younger, she was a spitting image of a Mogwai, of Gizmo. But that's as much of an impact it's had on my life. I know other people who have had sort of the same sort of story with pets and things like that. But yeah, this movie, it's one of those where I do enjoy this movie, and I do think it's a fantastic movie. But when I was younger, I just wanted to get over the beginning. I just wanted to get to the mayhem, to the carnage. I wanted to see the gremlins. I want to see the monsters, the creatures. I wanted to see the hijinks that they get up to. When I was younger, my favourite part, and I'm going to talk about it in the review. Again, you might think I'm a bit sick for mentioning it, but my favourite part as a kid was when they torment the horrible old lady that wants to kill Billy's dog. Then mess with her chair, and she goes like roller coaster up the stairs and flies out the window. That was the best part of the movie. I used to find that hilarious, and I don't think I'm wrong for saying that. I think many people agree that was the best part of the film. That the horrible witch lady, who was anything you could agree or disagree, was probably the biggest villain of that film. Forget about Spike. Forget about all the other gremlins. She was probably the biggest villain because she wanted to kill the dog. At least the gremlins didn't touch the dog. They just covered it in tinsel. You know what I mean? I think it did. I don't think they actually hurt the dog. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've actually watched Gremlins. Gremlins is a Christmas movie. I only really watch it at Christmas. But again, it's not my top 10. Like it's a great film, and I enjoy it, but it's not a top 10 for me. And since now I've seen Critters, specifically Critters 1. If you've seen my review of Critters 2, you know that I was a bit disappointed with that one. I won't go into it because, again, that's Halloween and that's completely different. But I really like the idea of Critters, because Critters, to me, is very much a grown-up style of Gremlins. Is what I wanted to see from Gremlins, was actual, not just the mayhem and destruction, but the killing, the death, the brutality. Like, you see the brutality in the Gremlins itself, and like the mom gets attacked by the tree. And you can say, yes, people do die again. Mrs. Futterman, as she goes through, Miss Futterman, Mrs. Deagle, as she goes through the window, and she's obviously dead. And the guy that plays the Santa, he gets sort of messed up. But like, it was never anything proper gruesome, really, where like Critters you did. So I feel like Critters has ruined me on Gremlins now, where like I would rather watch Critters. Critters 1 specifically. Critters 2 was going more on the direction that Gremlins 2 went in, which went from the hijinks and mayhem to just towards the silly. Granted, I do like Gremlins 2 though, and maybe one day we'll get on to talking about Gremlins 2. But it is a good movie. It's just not in my top 10 of Christmas films. And I know that might be a bit sort of bad to say, and I know people might disagree with me. It's a good Christmas film, but I don't rate it as highly as other ones. Like, for me, Jack Frost is still, and I'm talking about the Michael Keaton Jack Frost, not the horror movie, and not the animated one. I'm not talking about the Michael Keaton Jack Frost. That, for me, still rated as number 1 as the best Christmas movie of all time. But still, this is still a pretty good movie. And again, if you like Gremlins, then, you know, you enjoy it. And like I said, we all have a history of it. We all know the story. As for the production, so there's a lot to go with the production. So I've managed to split it up into background, development, casting, and special effects. Special effects is my most favorite part of this movie. Is just how good it looks still. Considering that it was made when it was made, it still looks good. And I always make this argument, and because it's a good argument to make, because it's always true. If practical effects are implemented and done well, they will stand the test of time. And if anything, they will look better with time. If you ever watch Dark Crystal now, or the Muppets Christmas Carol, you know they're Muppets, but that movie still looks good. You watch Dark Crystal now, and that film still looks good because it's all practical. In my opinion, anyway. Some people might disagree, but again, this is what I mean. Like, the practical effects will always be king. So that's why I've split them up. Right. So The background. Gremlins was produced at a time when combining horror and comedy was becoming increasingly popular. According to Professor Noel Carroll, Ghostbusters, the released the same weekend as Gremlins, and the comic strip The Far Side also followed this trend. Carroll argued that there was now a new genre emphasizing sudden shifts between humorous and horrific scenes, drawing laughs with plot elements that had been traditionally used to scare. The notion of the Gremlins was first conceived during the 1920s when mechanical faults in RAF aircrafts were jokingly blamed on small monsters. The term Gremlins also entered popular culture as children's author and RAF pilot Roald Dahl published a book called The Gremlins in 1943. Based on the mischievous creatures, Walt Disney considered making a film of it. A Bugs Bunny cartoon of the era, Falling Hair, has him battling a gremlin on an airplane. Joe Dante had read The Gremlins and said that the book was some influence on this film. In 1983, Dante publicly distanced his work from earlier films, explaining our gremlins are somewhat different. They're sort of green and they have big mouths and they smile a lot and they do incredibly really nasty things to make people to people and enjoy it all the while. So that's the development. That's the background. As for development, so the story of Gremlins was conceived by Chris Columbus. As Columbus explained, his inspiration came from his loft. When at night, what sounded like a platoon of mice would come out, and to hear them skittering around in the blackness was really creepy. End quote. He then wrote the original screenplay as a spec script to show potential employers that he had writing abilities. The story was not actually intended to be filmed until Steven Spielberg took on an interest in turning it into a film. As Spielberg explained, quote, it's the one of the most original things I've come across in many years, which is why I brought it. End quote. Spielberg considered Tim Burton to direct the film after seeing his short film Frankenweenie. After deciding to executive produced the film himself, Spielberg chose Dante as his director because of his experience with horror comedy. Dante had previously directed The Howling. However, in the time between The Howling and the offer to film The Gremlins, he had experienced a lull in his career. Dante had begun doing storyboard work on the film while also working as the director on The Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983, a film on which Spielberg also served as a director. The film's producer was Michael Finnell, who had also worked on The Howling with Dante. Spielberg took the project to Warner Brothers and co-produced it through his own company, Amblin Entertainment. Designer Chris Wales spoke on the creation of the initial concepts of the creatures. After reading the script, my first idea was to take the a little primitive and give it cartoony proportions. I wanted the big eyes to make it cute. I showed it to Mike Finnell and Joe Dante and they asked for some tweaks. So I made the next one. This is more like a puppy, big floppy ears. It's not based on any one dog in particular, just a cocker spaniel or something. Fortunately, they did not go with it. There were the only two mogwai I sculptured before the final one. End quote. The film script went through a few drafts before a shooting script was finalized. The film first version was much darker than the final film. Various scenes were cut, including one which portrayed Billy's mother dying in her struggle with the Gremlins, with her head thrown down the stairs when Billy arrives. That would have been awesome, by the way. Completely different movie, but that would have been awesome. Dante later explained the scene made the film darker than the filmmakers wanted. Oh, obviously it would have. There was also a scene where the Gremlins ate Billy's dog. See, they didn't touch the dog. You mess with a dog, that's when you lose the audience. Ate Billy's dog, and a scene where the Gremlins attacked McDonald's, eating customers instead of burgers. Also, instead of Stripe being a mogwai who became a gremlin, there was originally no mogwai named Stripe. Rather, Gizmo was supposed to transform into Stripe the gremlin. Spielberg overruled this plot element as he felt Gizmo was cute and that audience would want him to be present throughout the film. That was a good idea by Spielberg. The film mentions an urban legend in which Kate reveals in a speech that her father died at Christmas when he dressed as Santa Claus and broke his neck while climbing down the family's chimney. After the film completed, studio executives insisted upon its removal because they felt it was too ambiguous as to whether it was supposed to be funny or sad. Dante refused to take the scene out, saying it represented the film as a whole, which had a combination of horrific and comedic elements. Spielberg did not like the scene, but despite his creative control, he viewed Gremlins as Dante's project and allowed him to leave it in. A parody of this scene is featured in Gremlins 2, The New Batch. I quite like this scene, and I'll get on to the rest in a minute, but I quite like this scene. The reason being is the fact of I couldn't understand and appreciate it when I was younger. When I was younger, again, it was a scene. I didn't realize while it was there. I didn't much care for it. I was too young and immature to understand what she was talking about. But then rewatching it as an adult and actually listening to what she has to say and understand actually what she is saying and how horrific it is, you quickly realize the fact of, oh, that is horrific. That is very dark. But again, I feel like that is something for the adults, where the adults realize it, where the kids are too preoccupied of what the gremlins are doing, trying to what's this all got to do? How are you going to stop the gremlins? That they might not notice it. So I like it for that because it's something there for the adults. It's something there for the watcher, basically, the person who's paying attention. Something for them to enjoy and to listen to. And then hijinks and everything else comes sort of very later on. So I do enjoy that scene. I think I'm glad they kept it in because, again, it is what makes the Gremlins, that whole horrific side of it. You can't tell if it's a series, if it was a true story or not, but it's one of those where it's very, very well done. Oh, look, I'm already going into review mode. I didn't even start reviewing the movie yet. So, but I do like that scene. As for casting, so Phoebe Cates was cast as Kate, Billy's girlfriend, despite concerns that she was known for playing more risque parts, such as Linda Barrett in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Again, if you've seen that movie, you know why she is Queen. And I ain't going to say any more, but she was Queen. And again, growing up, but to us, I was born in '98, so by the time that I ever saw any movie that she was in, she was an adult. But growing up, again, had a crush on her, but who didn't at the end of the day? But yeah, Fast Times at Richmond High. If you've seen the movie, you understand why. Need I say more? Anyway, moving quickly on, Spielberg urged the casting of the relatively unknown Zach Galligan as Billy because he saw chemistry between Galligan and Cates during auditions. Galligan later compared himself to Billy, saying he was a geeky kid and that being in the film was really kind of a dream, given what I get to do, what my character gets to do, blow up movie theaters, adding that he got to work with great people. Spielberg commented when Gilligan was testing with Kate that he's in love with her already. And that was how Gilligan won the part. Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Ralph Macchio, Emilio Estevez, Rob Lowe, and Judd Nelson also auditioned for the role of Billy. In contrast to Galligan or Gulligan, I feel like I'm butchering his name. Many of the supporting actors and actresses were better known. Veteran actor Glyn Turman portrayed the high school science teacher whose study of a newborn mogwai leads to his death after it forms a cocoon, and emerges as a vicious gremlin. Dick Miller, great name, who was a regular in Dante's films, was another experienced actor on the set, playing a World War II veteran who first refers to the creatures as gremlins. Rand was played by Hoyt Axton, who was always the filmmaker's preferred choice for the role, even though it was widely contested by other actors. Axton's experience included acting as the father in The Black Stallion from 1979. He was also a country music singer-songwriter. After an introductory scene to Gremlins was cut, Axton's voice earned him the added role of the narrator to establish some context. Mr. Wing was played by Carl Luke, a renowned film actor whose film career spanned half a century, although in reality he was around 80 at the time of filming and his character was very elderly. Luke's youthful appearance had to be converted by makeup. Corey Feldman, who up to that time had primarily been in commercials, played Pete Fontaine, establishing his early credentials as a child actor. He previously met Will Spielberg when he auditioned for E.T. Polly Holliday, an actress best known for her role in Alice, played Miss Deagle. Dante considered the casting fortunate as she was well known and he considered her to be talented. Two other well-known actors, Fast Times Judge Reinhold and character actor Edward Andrews, received roles that were significantly reduced after the film was edited. They played Billy's superiors at the bank. Tom Hanks also read for Gerald. So that is the casting. Finally, just before we get into that review itself, the special effects, because I want to talk about special effects because you need to when talking about Gremlins. So some of the performances were shot on the Courthouse Square and Colonial Street sets of the Universal Studios lot in Universal City, which you might recognize if you've seen Back to the Future, Bruce Almighty. It's been used in countless other movies. Those are the two that come to mind, but basically you know this little square if you've seen any sort of classic movie, especially from Universal. And I think it's part of the tour when you do the Universal Backlot tour. I've never had the privilege to do it, but I'm sure it's part of that tour. Anyway, Miss Deagle's house was one such set, as well as the opening street scene in Chinatown, which were filmed on the Warner Brothers Studios backlot. This required fake snow. Dante also felt it was an atmosphere that would make the special effects more convincing. An earlier attempt to use monkeys to interpret the gremlins was abandoned because the test monkey panicked when made to wear a gremlin head. Puppets and marionettes were used instead, which is a better option because if you ever work with animals, especially monkeys, and monkeys at a very young age can get very sort of tetchy. And there have been many issues on movie sets and in real life where people mess with monkeys and apes, and when they go crazy, they go crazy. So always best to go with what you know. Go with puppets and marionettes. It's always a better choice. So the actors worked alongside them in most scenes, the puppets and marionettes, not the monkeys. Nevertheless, after the actors finished their work for good, a great deal of effort was spent finishing the effects. Numerous small rubber puppets, some of which were mechanical, were used to portray Gizmo and the Gremlins. They were designed by Chris Wallace. There was more than one Gizmo puppet and occasionally Galligan, which carrying one would set him down off camera. And when Gizmo appeared again, sitting on a surface, it was actually a different puppet wired to the surface. These puppets had many limitations. The Gizmo puppets were practically frustrating because they were smaller and thus broke down more. While Wallace recommended making the Mogwais larger to make their creation and functioning easier for the special effects team, Dante insisted on keeping their size small to enhance the cuteness of the creatures, which again works perfectly for the character. Consequently, to satisfy the crew, a scene was included in which the Gremlins hang Gizmo on a wall and throw darts at him. This was included on a list that the crew created, known to them as the Horrible Things to Do to Gizmo list. Rob Bottin and John Daskra were originally considered to do the special effects. Bottin was Dante's first choice, but he was too busy working on Legend from 1985. Other effects required large Mogwai faces and ears to be produced for close-ups, as the puppets were less capable of conveying emotion. Consequently, large props simulating food were needed for the close-ups in the scenes in which the Mogwai feast after midnight. An enlarged Gizmo puppet was also needed for the scene in which he multiplies. The new Mogwai, who popped out of Gizmo's body as small furry balls, which then started to grow, were balloons and expanded as such. Wallace had also created the exploding gremlin in the microwave by means of a balloon that was allowed to burst. Howie Mandel, so I love this one. So I didn't learn about this fact until I think it was a year or two ago when I was watching TikTok. And I think it was a snippet from his podcast, or he was on somebody else's podcast, and somebody asked him about it, and they thought it was like one of them sort of Hollywood rumors that wasn't true, but it is true. Howie Mandel provided the voice for Gizmo. He was a prolific voice actor, and and yet he provided the voice. As for sort of actor Frank Welker provided the voice for Stripe, it was also Welker who suggested Mandel perform in Gremlins. The puppets' lines were mostly invented by the voice actors based on cues from the physical actors of the puppets, which were filmed before the voice work. When developing the voice for Gizmo, Mandel explained, quote, Gizmo was cute and naive. So, I got in touch with that. I couldn't envision going any other way or do something different with it, end quote. The majority of the other Gremlins voices were performed by Michael Winslow and Peter Cullen, while the remaining voices were done by Mandel, Wellcat, Bob Bergen, Fred Newman, Jim Cummins, Sonny Mendez, Mark Dodson, Bob Holt, Michael Sheenan, and even Dante himself. So that is the production, all the way from the background to development to the casting to the special effects. To be honest, the one that surprised me out of all of them was just Howie Mandel. Whenever I think of, I see that man with that weird bit of hair that he has underneath his lip, and I'm like, shave it off, man. If you're going to shave it all, just shave it all. Why just keep a little bit of hair? But again, that's a completely different rant for a completely different day. But it always surprises me that he's the one that does the voice for Gizmo. And I think he can still do the voice. I'm almost sure of it. Anyway, so that is the production. I'm going to go off now and watch Gremlins. Is it better than what I remember it being? Does it live up to it? Is it deserving of the top 10? Does something need to be bumped off so it can get that top 10? We will see in a few seconds, right after this jingle. Right, and welcome back. So, Gremlins, my first impressions, it's good. I like it. It's still not my top 10, but I still feel like it is a very good film. I generally feel, and I had this going through my head as I was watching it, was that Critters has spoiled me on sort of the Gremlins, little creatures, little sort of mischievous monsters sort of genre. It's ruined me because I know what Gremlins could be because I've seen Critters. And if you see my Critters review, or should I say listen to it, you will know that when I grew up watching Gremlins, one thing that I'd always wanted to see out of the Gremlins, but we never really properly got it, was more brutality. The proper death, the killing, the eating of people, or just real sort of proper gore. And I know that we couldn't get it because, again, this movie would be too dark. And again, it is a Christmas tone. It's got to be a bit lighter. It's got to have a bit of jokes and horror in it. And I completely get that. But when I watched Critters, straight away, what sold me was the fact of it is Gremlins, but more harder in terms of the gore and the sort of ferocity and lethality, shall we say, of the creatures. Because obviously the crates, they were very sort of, they would just devour us. Is that if you were there, you'd get sort of devoured completely. They'd strip you to the bone. Whereas obviously the Gremlins, they mess about with you first. They play with their food, basically. They mess about with you. They throw things at you. And I don't think they're overly trying to kill you. I think mostly the fact of it is just them being mischievous, being Gremlins. And then if you die, you die. It's hilarious to them. So I don't think they're out to kill you. They're just out to kind of cause harm and mayhem and destruction, but not overly kill, if that makes sense, right? People just happen to die. And I feel like that is the biggest hurdle I had going into this movie, is that even though I went in with an empty sort of brain, I went in an empty mind, like I do with everything that I watch for the first time or millionth time, I still just couldn't have that thought of like I had been ruined by watching Critters. But that being said, this film is still fun, and for what it is and what it does, I do enjoy it. Gremlins is still a lot of fun, and I get, you can still get enjoyment out of it, even if, like me, you've seen Critters before. But that shouldn't put you off this movie at all, because Gremlins is still pretty good, in my opinion. Obviously, it is for a lot in their top 10, and it's one of the best Christmas movies ever made, in a lot of people's opinions. But for me, it is a generally overall just good film. Great at parts. One of my favorite moments that I really, really enjoy, next to sort of like that really deep and sort of human sort of story with Kate, and she tells the story of her dad, and it's very horrifying and very real and brutal, and again, great writing. But one of the parts I love about this movie, which I think is so badass, and I appreciate a lot more now as an adult watching it and being a film lover than I did watching this movie when I was younger, was just the moment where you have Billy's mom. She's on her own. And this is where I feel like the movie goes pure horror and suspenseful and creepy, is where you have Billy's mom. She's on her own. And Billy's like, look, they've hatched, get out of the house. But before he can warn her, phone's cut and she's stuck. And she hears noises downstairs, so she arms herself with a knife and she goes hunting around the house. And she gets plates thrown at her, and she battles the gremlins. She minces one up, she puts one in a microwave and just watches it explode, which is an awesome effect. It's just incredible, and that's probably what would happen if you put yourself in a microwave, because that's how microwaves work. I think they cook from the inside out. So if you put a person in there or some sort of living thing, I'm sure it'd probably explode. I don't really know how they work. The only thing I can think of is if you ever watched the movie, with Nicolas Cage, that's not super bad. What is it? Kick-Ass, where they get the one mob boss and they stick, well, not bomb boss, one of the sort of mobsters, and they stick him in this giant sort of oven that is meant to be used for cooking pots, and they put him in and it just goes poof, and the guy just explodes. So I'd imagine that's what it looks like. But it's a cool effect, and she does, and she's really badass. And what she's dispatched the two very sort of like she's got a tray, and she's very sort of Captain America style, battering the plates off, and then stabs one. When she's dispatched all of the gremlins in the kitchen, she moves on to the living room. She's got 2 knives, and real final girl, or should I say final woman energy, and it obviously fantastic. And then she goes into the living room. She's ready. She slices at one of the stockings because there's movement in it, falls out a robot. She goes backwards, and then you just see the red eyes in the tree, and then they just jump on her. And she's there stabbing at him, trying to slice it, but it's not working. It's not until Billy comes in and knocks a gremlin into fire that, again, he saves his mom. But this whole scene from start to finish to when Billy comes in is the best scene of the movie for me, because it is the what I would want to see, in the movie like this. I want the horror. I want sort of like, don't show me the monsters straight away, which they didn't. They don't show you the gremlins. They don't show you what they look like. You don't see them. You just get shadows. And then you see them, then you know how horrifying, and you're seeing them when Billy's mom sees them, and your reaction is, that's disgusting, that's horrible, that's a demon, it's gremlin, it's disgusting, and her reaction is very sort of honest to that. And then how would you deal with that? If you got a big knife, would you try and beat it, or would you try and stab it, or would you run away? Like, what would you do? So that sort of suspenseful moment of the music of "Do you hear what I hear?" Which, to be honest, every time I hear that music now, this scene is all I can think of. That song. It's a good song, but it's been completely ruined to me by Gremlins, because every time I hear it, I just think of this scene. But yeah, it's such a mood setter, and I just wish there was just a few more moments like this in the film, because I feel like once the Gremlins get introduced, it gets not silly, but it does get a little bit more slapstick, sort of like, I feel like the gremlins themselves lose their danger to me, whereas like, they're dangerous, but you can tell they're just messing about. So to me, that's like, yes, they are dangerous, yes, they are killing people, but I just feel like they're more slapstick. It's more play for comedy. But again, still enjoyable. One thing also I noticed, and again, one thing I wish that Critters 2 did, which they didn't do. One of my biggest notes for that was the fact of, you've now got the crates that are in the big city and they're attacking people. I want to see separate stories, just mini sort of stories that could be like 2 minutes long. They could be gags or whatever of people sort of having interactions with the crates, and you get that here in the Gremlins. When the Gremlins first get into the little town, you've got the people. You've got the Mrs. Deagle with that scene where she opens the door, sings their carolers, and she's like freaking out. It's like, they're here for me. They're here for me. It's kind of like, if I think I'm thinking, oh, maybe does she think they're demons? Does she think that it's the Grim Reaper or something like that? Like, she's realized that her soul, because she's so mean and cruel and horrible, that they've come for a soul, that she's not ready to go, and then she flies it like a roller coaster out of a window. You've got the priest, going to the mailbox, and he put his mail in, not working, get thrown at him. He says to the other guy, well, you give it a go, and that guy gets his arm eaten. And little moments like this. You've got the 2 sheriffs in the cop car, and the brakes get cut, and they go flying, they crash, and different moments like this. This is what I want as well. I want separate stories. I don't just want the hero characters. I want to see how other people interact with the Gremlins and these sort of characters, because again, that's what you come for. You come for that extra bit, that extra side, because again, you're going to unleash them onto a town. You want to see them interacting with other people and getting into hijinks and mischief and death and destruction and all that. So there are a lot of good moments that I really like. Like I said, first impressions after again, this is not my first time, but my first impressions coming into it in a review, it is still pretty good, and it is an enjoyable movie, and it's got a good pace, and it is very interesting, a lot of fun. I love the bits where, like, again, no, I'm actually going to save it for a second. I'm going to get to when I get to sort of the presentation, because I feel like I'm just rattling off. Let's talk about the story. I won't go into detail with the story because everybody knows the story of Gremlins. It's not like when I did with the first 2 Christmas movies I've done for this month, where they're unknown and people don't know about them. So I've got to kind of go do the Doom generation sort of thing and talk about the stories more in depth. So I'm not going to go into depth of the story, but I like what the presentation here, that it starts with the introduction by the dad. The dad sort of introduces everybody to what's going on, who he is, and then you get this sort of introduction to the old man and the mogwai, and then he brings it home, and then Billy gets it, and he slowly starts to learn about the responsibility of owning a mogwai, and obviously then hijinks ensue. But I have a few little sort of plot points in the story that kind of have always sort of picked at me, and I've never had an outlet so I can complain, or not complain, just sort of air them out. So you're going to listen to my TED talk on the issues I have with the Gremlins. So it's established that the three rules: don't get them wet, don't put them in direct sunlight or any sort of bright light because it'll kill them. And definitely don't feed them after midnight. So those are the 3 rules. Simple, right? Rule number 1, again, they don't like bright light. That works for Gizmo, and that works for the Gremlins fine. The water, same sort of concept. If you get water on Gizmo, he will multiply. Okay, fine. The thing that gets me is the whole idea of the water. So it's snowing. It's Christmas. We all know what snow is. It is water that has crystallized and gone into snow. It's that's what it is. So why is it that when Spike or any of the Gremlins go out and walk in snow with their feet, are they not freaking out on the floor and multiplying like crazy? Why is it when they're in the bar and they're throwing alcohol at each other and that sort of thing, why are they not multiplying there? I don't know if it was if it's because is it because it has to be specifically just H2O, or is it the fact of if it's alcohol, it doesn't work because there's too many chemicals? It just needs to be hydrogen oxygen, and if you put anything else in, it just doesn't work. Like I don't know, or maybe it's the fact of the writers were like, let's ignore it. People are enjoying the scene. Let's not think too hard about it. But those are the things that bother me: is the fact of, okay, why is he not multiplying? Why does he have to jump into a swimming pool or stand in a water fountain or get water spilt on them for it to work? Why doesn't alcohol and snow work? Why are they not all over the place freaking out and multiplying like crazy? So it's little things like that sort of bother me, but it's you can look over them. Like if you don't think too hard, again, in this movie, it's Gremlins at the end of the day. You're here for the slapstick, you're here for the hijinks, the mayhem. You're not here to think about these sort of things. So you can look over them, but it's every time I've watched it, again, I've said this many times, me and my dad do this. I think we ruin movies for ourselves, honestly, because we nitpick. We watch a movie that you've seen hundreds and hundreds of times. You can't help not sit there and just sort of pick things out to make it a bit more interesting. And it's these things that conversations I've had with my dad of like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Why are they walking in snow? They should be multiplying, but they're not. It is a bit silly. Maybe there's a reason for it and that I've missed, or maybe there's an explanation in some sort of book or law that I didn't know about. I don't know. But it's something that's always ached me. I just wanted to air it out. But no, I do, moving on from that, I do like sort of the way the hijinks happen. So I love the idea that, and again, this is sort of my headcanon, that Gizmo he's lived, say, a long life. We don't know how long Gizmo's been alive, but we can imagine he's lived a longish life with the old man. And this idea and concept that the reason why when Gizmo gets wet and the other sort of Mogwai start to spawn, reason why they're so naughty and misbehave and mischievous is because they're young, immature, and like they're kids, basically. They're babies. They're going to be. And that's part of the whole idea of owning a Mogwai and the responsibility of owning a Mogwai is the fact of you have given the responsibility of a Mogwai. They're going to misbehave. It's up to you then to follow the rules and to teach it manners, teach it how to grow up, how to mature, how to be a better, I was going to say person, but a better Mogwai. So that's why when you get Gizmo and he realizes, like Billy says to him, hey Giz, do you want a chicken wing? And Gizmo goes, no, because he knows, like, I don't want one because it's too late. Whereas the others have tricked Billy and they're like, yeah, here you go. It's fine. Take these chicken wings. You know what I mean? And it's things like that where you can just see that Gizmo, it realizes, like he's been through this before. He knows the process. When he first gets wet and he sees them all standing around him, he goes, uh-oh, sort of thing. Like it's implied that he's been around this long enough. He's seen it happen. And I feel like that's why Gizmo is the way he is, because again, the old man has had him for such a long time that he's taught him, he's behaved, he's good. And again, it comes with the responsibility of owning a Mogwai. Like that's your responsibility, is to make sure they don't turn into a gremlin, that they don't, that they grow out the mischievousness, they grow out of the chaotic child side, and they grow up and they mature. Because again, Gizmo's not like them. When Gizmo's not trying to do all the things the Gremlins are doing, I am curious though. Again, you'd never see it because the whole idea of having Gizmo is to keep him cute and keep him pure, which is completely fine because that's in with the character. But there are moments when I have had this sort of mind thought where I was thinking, what would happen if, for some unknown reason, you gave Gizmo food after midnight, right? What would be the effect? Would he again turn into a gremlin, and would his mannerisms completely change? Would he revert back to the way the other gremlins are and being very destructive and violent? Or would he turn into a gremlin but still keep his maturity? He's just now stuck as a gremlin, but he is still that matureness. He's not violent. Again, we'll never know. We'll probably never see it. But it's these sort of things that sort of go in your head, like I said, when you've watched the movie a million times. But again, these are small little things here and there. But I like the idea and concept of the Mogwai, of the responsibility. I like the story. I think the pacing's quite interesting. Everything, again, is still enjoyable. It's like this movie's about 1 hour and 36 minutes. So it's one of those where you can put it on during Christmas, and it will just go quite quickly. And it's comes to what I was thinking. Moving into sort of the presentation, I thought if they ever remade this movie, which I hope they don't, because most remakes nowadays just don't work, and for a good reason, for what I'm going to say right now. I know for a fact, because they did it with Ghostbusters, I know for a fact that if they rebooted Gremlins, all the Gremlins would mostly be, and probably even Gizmo to an extent as well, would all be CGI. Majority of the Gremlins you'd see on screen would all be CGI. Now, granted, when CGI is done well, you can it can be quite believable, it can be quite realistic, and you can do a lot more with CGI than you can with practical. But as I say all the time, practical will always look better, and it will mature like fine wine. It will get better with age. And there are moments in this movie that with the practical effects, this movie's from the 80s, but when you have those moments when it's just the Gremlins, when it's Gizmo, you look and go, that looks modern. It looks new. It hasn't aged. It still looks good on screen. It's everything else that obviously is aged, but that still looks good. And I just know that if they rebooted the Gremlins, this all would be CGI, and it would just lose that, not just the edge, but it'd lose the feeling of what Gremlins is. Really, it's that realistic, that real sort of feeling. Like they've done it with Goosebumps. They did it with, like I said, the newer Ghostbusters. I don't know what it is. It's like they just don't want to do practical effects anymore. I think, is it because CGI is cheaper? Possibly. But I just feel like if I was a movie maker and I had the option between doing practical effects and CGI, I'd be like, I want to do practical everywhere and anywhere that I can do it, and only do CGI if I really have to. Otherwise, I want to do all bare basics of just practical effects, get puppeteers in, and do it like that. Like, if you ever seen Small Soldiers, that movie still looks good today because that was all done with puppets. And I love that movie, and one day I'll look into it. That's another movie that I'm surprised I haven't looked into yet, so I got to write that down on the whiteboard. But the presentation for the puppets and the design is incredible. Obviously, Gizmo is very cute. He's very fluffy, and it adds to his cuteness when he talks. When obviously Harry Mandel is doing the voice of Gizmo, he's like, "Bye, Billy, Billy," and he's like, "Oh no," and those little noises. Like, I love it. It's cute, and I'm glad they didn't decide to have. They changed the idea of having Gizmo and Stripe be the same character that Gizmo would turn into Stripe. I'm glad they changed that because again, I don't think it would have worked. It's better to have Stripe as his own character and Gizmo as its own character, because then you have the yin and yang. You have the good side of a Mogwai and you've got the bad side of a Mogwai. What can happen if you don't follow the rules? Gremlins happen and it ruins things. So you've got to follow the rules, and if you follow the rules, you get a modeled Mogwai like Gizmo. So you need that good and the bad, that yin and the yang. It works perfectly for that. Again, the designs of the Gremlins is absolutely outright incredible, and I really like the sort of the demon-y sort of I don't know, like little goblin sort of looking sort of creatures. To be honest, like orc muchiness. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, gremlin-y look of it. It's a really well done design. It's not too terrifying, but it's creepy, it's scary, it's again unnerving because again it's unnatural. But also when they're laughing and when they're having sort of their sort of play, shall we say, you're with them. You can see that they're horrible and disgusting, but when they're messing about and causing hijinks, you can still connect with them and still go, "Oh, that's funny." You can still somewhat emote with them on the hilarity point of view instead of the emotive point of view, as you do with Gizmo, which again I really do like and appreciate that. I also love. I didn't mention this. I forgot to mention in the story part, but I'll add it here in the presentation. Was the bit where you have the science teacher, and again, there are better ways that he could have done it for himself. I think he really just kind of signed his own death warrant. But how basically he has the Mogwai, and like any sort of scientist, he goes, "I'm going to experiment." So he just stabs the one sort of Mogwai that he's got. And I feel like with this Mogwai, this one doesn't seem to be like the others. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we just don't get enough scenes of it to really sort of show. But when I was watching, when Gizmo first changes and you get all the other Mogwais, they again straight away mischievous, naughty, everything that we've come to expect. When especially Stripe as well, who's a leader of them all. This one that the scientist has, the science teacher, doesn't seem to be mischievous. If anything, it reminds me very much of Gizmo. He seems quite quiet. He seems quite not very naughty. And again, it goes back to my fact of, are they all evil when they first form, or is it like a lot of humans? Is it like a personality thing? Like some are mean, some are cute. You just don't know what you're going to get until you get one wet. You know what I mean? That oddly rhymes. But this one didn't seem that mean. But it was kind of with this doctor doing his test, taking blood, and we don't know what else he was doing to sort of the Mogwai. This is kind of one of the other sort of deaths that I was kind of sort of rooting for, was the fact of obviously you got Mr. Eagle, but when this one again, because he wasn't feeding either, like he even said hungry, like again he didn't say it like, "Oh, hungry." He said it very cute way. So I don't think this one was evil, but whatever the doctor did to it, that the Mogwai ate the sandwich midnight, turned into a gremlin, and then ends up attacking. And I would imagine, he does. He kills the professor. But one thing I love, add a bit of detail, is he just stabs him in the bum with a syringe, which I just thought was hilarious. Because the fact, if you're going to prick me, I'm going to prick you. And again, it's one of those where, in fact, would that Mogwai have turned evil if the professor hadn't have done sort of tests on it? If that Mogwai had stayed with Gizmo, would it have stayed humble, or would Billy would have been able to train it, or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I always was uncomfortable about the sciencey parts of the movie with the professor. I never liked those parts. There's always the parts that, I don't know, when I was younger, never sat with me. Maybe because I don't like cruelty to animals. That's why it never sat with me. And it still doesn't now. Watching it over, I was like, no, I don't like it. So when the sort of professor gets his comeuppance, and then the gremlin stabs him in the bottom with a syringe, it's quite funny, to be honest. And it always makes me giggle. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. That's what you prick me, I prick you. But yeah, what are my overall thoughts? Gremlins is a classic, and it is a cult classic, and I do enjoy it, and it is really, really good. Yes, it's still not my top 10, but there are things here that are enjoyable. It works as a Christmas movie. Again, you could probably watch this at Halloween as well. I know, it is mostly set at Christmas, but it has that sort of horror comedy mixed in with sort of seasonal things that you could potentially, like Krampus. Krampus is a Christmas movie, but you could probably watch Krampus at Christmas. I mean, at Halloween as well, and still get that sort of creepy sort of Halloween vibe out of it as well. And I feel like this is one of the movies that, like Nightmare Before Christmas, you could watch it both Halloween and Christmas, and it would work both for both times of the year. Again, like I said, for me personally, I feel like watching Critters has ruined Gremlins for me. That I feel like if I hadn't seen that, I probably would enjoy it a lot more. But like I said in the introduction, with Gremlins 2, Critters 2 did the same. And what I mean by that is the fact of Critters had the basis of being quite brutal and horrific, and was on the up and up of being a lot more sort of gory. Then they had the sequel, and it was all just for laughs. It was like watching a giant cartoon. And that is what Gremlins 2 is. I actually really kind of like Gremlins 2. I wouldn't say I prefer it because I haven't seen Gremlins 2 in a very, very long time, but I do enjoy Gremlins 2 quite a bit for the silliness of it. And again, Gremlins did that. They went from having the foundation of being sort of horror and sort of comedy and that sort of thing, and then they kind of went full sort of Looney Tunes silly. But I feel like for Gremlins 2 it works. For Critters 2 it didn't work. And I know you're probably sitting there going, Luke, it's unfair to compare Critters and Gremlins because they're two completely different things, but they share the same essence. They share the same sort of foundation of sort of critters, or like creatures, gremlins causing hijinks and mayhem. Just one's more brutal than the other. But Gremlins is, for what it is and for what it does, I love it, and I still enjoy it. It's just, it hasn't reached my top 10, but that's fine. Not every movie is for everybody at the end of the day. I get enjoyment out of this one. I get enjoyment out of the Critters, and I get enjoyment out of everything else that I watch. I know I'm probably going to get some people going, Luke, you're wrong. Gremlins is the best movie ever. And if you do, but if you feel that way, and generally, if it's one of your top 10 favorite Christmas movies, then all power to you. I completely support that. It's just not one for me, but I would still say it is a very enjoyable film. Anyway, moving on to the end, to the trivia part, not to the end just yet. So majority of the trivia that I had, I basically said it in the introduction. So I had to dig for some extra bit of trivia, which was a little bit sort of difficult, but I managed to find some that I think people might find quite interesting. So one of the studio notes to director Joe Dante and executive producer Steven Spielberg on seeing the final cut was that there were too many gremlins. Spielberg suggested cutting them all out and calling the movie People, which sounds like a very sort of Spielberg move. Zach Galligan recounted in an interview that when the movie was made, there was no CGI, so all of the gremlins were animatronics, each costing between 30 to 40 million 30 to 40,000, dollars, which adjusted to 2024 inflation terms is about $60,000 to about $90,500 dollars. When everybody left the lot for the day, security would have everyone open their trunks and open their pockets, and just to make sure that nobody was stealing them. That's how much they were worth. Which I don't blame you. Like if you had the option to get yourself a Gremlin or a Mogwai, I would take it. Or so I mean, so we'd all do it. So I completely get where they're coming from. But yeah, $30,000 to $40,000 each. That's a lot of money, especially just for inflation. Get my words out. Just for inflation today, it's a lot of money. But to be honest, the nostalgia side of it, if you actually had one for sale, it'd go for a lot of money nowadays. People love memorabilia. I love memorabilia. So if you had a proper one, that even though that's how much it costs to make today, which is probably why it puts a lot of people off making animatronic sort of puppets nowadays. But it would probably go for a lot more on the movie market. The movie was released on the same day as Ghostbusters. There was little to no dialogue for the Gremlins and Mogwai that exists in the script, in addition to several instances of on-set writers changing or adding too much of the script. The voiceovers were mostly ad-libs repeating snippets of just performed dialogue or in reaction to other sound effects or environment. To this end, Howie Mandel recorded Gizmo's lines for foreign dubs of the movie, which were then localized dialogue and in-jokes helped make this movie successful with audiences worldwide. At least one of Phoebe Cates' screams in the scene at Dory's Tavern is genuine. Apparently, an enormous cockroach crawled out in front of her during one take. The Gizmo puppets were particularly frustrating because they were smaller, thus broke down more. And then Christopher Columbus' script went through a few drafts before shooting. The script was finalized. His original version had the Gremlins killing the dog, as we've put instead, and rolling the mom's head down the stairs. Where was I getting that now? Yeah, that's it. So that is all the trivia I could find, because I realized going through my notes that I'd basically splurged on a lot of the trivia in the introduction. So I didn't have actually a lot to put there. So I found myself just rereading a lot of stuff I'd already written. But that is all she wrote. That is everything about Gremlins that I'm going to talk about today. Hopefully you all liked and enjoyed it. It was fun. Even though this movie didn't blow me away, I still had a lot of fun going back to it and watching it for the podcast. Next year, definitely, I'm going to do Violet Night, because that movie, not just because it came second, but generally, even though it's still relatively new, I think 2022 or 2023 the movie came out, I'm not sure. Even though the movie's still relatively new, I still feel like it's a hidden gem. It's one of them films that I feel like a lot of people passed over and haven't watched. Mostly because nowadays there's so much content out there and not many people go to the cinema as they used to, that I feel like it's just one of the movies that I was overlooked. And obviously, it being 2025, obviously next year, it had been a few years before the film come out, so it's not old, but it's still sort of in the public eye. So it's still a film that I want to look into. As for what's coming next week, so obviously it's Christmas next week. I'm not going to give any sort of big clues out, but if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you would know that what I'm going to be looking at next week is part of a well-known established franchise and IP. It was based in books. It had a few two live action films, including the one I'm going to look at. Mostly been animated since, and some say for good reason. It depends on your thoughts and feelings on the live actions. One was really successful. The other one wasn't very successful, but I really, really enjoy and love it, and I'll defend that movie till the day that I die. And if that is not enough to make you realize what I'm talking about, then you haven't been around my podcast long enough. So I'd recommend going back and checking some old episodes out, so you're ready for what is to come next week. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited. It's been on my list for a long time, and yeah, it's going to be. I was trying to think of a clever pun, but I couldn't think of one. Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, so thank you very, very much for listening to the podcast. I've been your host, Luke the Human. Hope you all have an absolutely fantastic holiday. And I will catch you very, very soon in next week's episode. Bye-bye, guys.